My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 31 years old. 3 months ago, I almost died in my own kitchen. And the worst part wasn't the sirens or the hospital or the tube they pushed down my throat. The worst part came 2 weeks later, when a detective sat across from me with a folder in his hands and said the words that broke something inside me forever. Mrs. Bennett, this wasn't an accident. I had spent my whole life believing I knew the people closest to me. I was wrong. And when I finally learned who wanted me gone, I felt every drop of blood drain from my face. Before I tell you what really happened that night, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. It started like any ordinary Tuesday in our little house outside Asheville, North Carolina. I'd lived there almost 6 years ever since my father passed and left me the place along with the small bakery he'd built up from nothing on Main Street. Sweetgrass Bakery. He used to say the smell of fresh bread was the only inheritance worth having, but he left me more than that. He left me the building, the recipes, and a savings account that turned out to be a lot bigger than anyone in the family expected. That morning I woke up early like always. The light was coming in soft through the curtains, and for a second everything felt right. My husband Daniel was still asleep next to me, one arm thrown over his eyes the way he sleeps. I lay there listening to the birds outside and thinking about the day ahead. We had a big catering order due that weekend, 200 dinner rolls and a 3-tier cake for a wedding out at the Biltmore. I remember being excited about it. I remember being lucky about it. I remember feeling lucky. Daniel stirred and smiled at me without opening his eyes. "You're staring," he mumbled. "I'm allowed," I said. "It's my house." He laughed and pulled me closer, and we stayed like that for a few minutes before the alarm went off for real. He kissed my forehead and told me he'd handle the morning drop-off at the bakery so I could rest, because I've been feeling run down lately. Tired all the time, headaches that wouldn't quit, stomach trouble that came and went. I figured it was stress. Running a small business will do that to you. That's what everybody figured. Stress. I should have known better. The headaches had started maybe a month before. Just dull pressure behind my eyes at first, the kind a couple of Advil could knock out. Then they got worse. I'd wake up in the morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all, my head pounding, my mouth dry, this strange metallic taste on my tongue that I couldn't shake no matter how much water I drank. Some mornings I'd be so dizzy getting out of bed I had to hold the wall. I went to my doctor twice. She ran blood work, checked my thyroid, asked about my diet, my sleep, my stress. Everything came back fine, or fine enough. She told me to take it easy, drink more water, maybe cut back on coffee. So I did. I cut back on everything, and I still felt like I was slowly being poisoned from the inside out. I just didn't know yet how literally true that was. The strange thing was, I'd always felt worse at home. At the bakery, surrounded by flour and ovens and the chime of the front door, I felt almost normal. But the longer I stayed in the house, especially overnight, the worse I got. Daniel noticed it too. He kept saying maybe it was mold, maybe we needed to get the air ducts cleaned, maybe the old furnace was leaking something. He even called a guy out to look at it once. The guy said everything checked out fine. No carbon monoxide, no gas leak, nothing. But Daniel didn't drop it. That's the thing I want you to remember. He didn't drop it. He bought one of those carbon monoxide detectors and plugged it into the bedroom outlet, and he installed a second one in the kitchen. My family thought he was being paranoid. My younger sister Megan actually laughed about it at Sunday dinner one night. Daniel the doomsday prepper, she called him, and everybody chuckled, and I told her to leave him alone. I want you to remember Megan too. Now, my sister and I had always been close. 2 years apart, raised by a single dad after our mom left when we were little. We did everything together growing up. When Dad got sick, it was the two of us at his bedside, holding his hands, promising we'd take care of each other. After he passed, Megan had a rough couple of years. Bad relationship, money problems, a few jobs that didn't work out. About a year before all this happened, she'd gone through an ugly divorce and ended up moving back to Asheville with her new boyfriend, a man named Kyle. I didn't know Kyle well. He was charming in that way that always made me a little uneasy. The kind of guy who looked you light in the eyes and called you darling and somehow made you feel watched instead of seen. He did contracting work or said he did. Mostly he seemed to be between jobs. Megan adored him though, and I wanted to be supportive. So when she asked if Kyle could do some repairs around our house to make a little money, I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my sister. So for about 2 months, Kyle was in and out of our house all the time, fixing the back deck, retiling the upstairs bathroom, looking at the furnace, replacing the old water heater in the basement. Daniel paid him fair, more than fair honestly. And I bring them both lemonade and we'd all chat on the porch like one big happy family. I trusted him in my home. I gave him a key. That's the part I never forgive myself for. Okay, so now let me tell you about the night everything fell apart. It was a Thursday in late September. Daniel had driven down to Charlotte for a baking equipment auction, the kind of thing he loved going to. He wasn't coming back until the next afternoon. I remember he called me around 8 to say goodnight, and I told him I was going to bed early because my head was killing me again. He told me to sleep with the window cracked, just in case. I told him he worried too much. He said he'd rather worry than be sorry. Those were the last words I heard from him before everything went black. I'd rather worry than be sorry. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table for a while, paying bills, listening to the quiet. The house ticked and settled the way old houses do. I felt that familiar pressure building behind my eyes, the dizziness creeping in at the edges. I figured I'd just go to bed and sleep it off. I never made it upstairs. The last clear thing I remember is standing up from the table and feeling the floor tilt sideways. I grabbed the counter. My vision swam. I thought, I just need to lie down for a second. I made it as far as the living room couch, maybe 10 feet, before my legs gave out completely. I remember the carpet against my cheek. I remember thinking, this is bad. I should call someone, but I couldn't make my arms work. My phone was on the kitchen table. It might as well have been on the moon. And then, nothing. Here's what I learned later, because I wasn't conscious for any of it. Around 11 that night, the carbon monoxide detector Daniel had installed in the bedroom started screaming. Now, here's the thing. The official inspection had said our house was fine. But the detector Daniel bought wasn't just a basic one. It was a smart model that connected to an app on his phone, and when the level spiked, it sent him an alert in Charlotte. He told me later he was already in bed at the hotel when his phone lit up with a notification that made his blood run cold. He called the house. No answer. He called my cell. No answer. He called again and again, his heart pounding, 2 hours away from me with no way to get there in time. So he did the only thing he could. He called 911 and begged them to send someone to our address for a possible carbon monoxide emergency. Then he got in his truck and drove 90 miles an hour the whole way home. The fire department got to the house first. They had to break down the front door. They found me unconscious on the living room floor, my lips already turning blue. One of the firefighters told me afterward that another 20 minutes and I wouldn't have made it. 20 minutes? That's how close I came. They got me out into the fresh air, put me on oxygen, and rushed me to Mission Hospital. Carbon monoxide poisoning, severe. My blood oxygen was dangerously low. They put me in a hyperbaric chamber to force oxygen back into my system, and they kept me unconscious and stable for almost 2 days while my body fought to recover. When I finally opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was Daniel. He was sitting in a plastic chair pulled up close to the bed, holding my hand, his face gray with exhaustion, dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't shaved. He hadn't slept. When he saw me looking at him, he just broke. This big, steady man who never cried. He put his head down on the edge of my bed and sobbed. "You're okay," he kept saying. "You're okay. I've got you." I tried to talk, but my throat was raw from the breathing tube. He gave me ice chips and stroked my hair and told me everything was going to be fine, that I was safe now, that he was never leaving my side again. And he didn't. For 3 days in that hospital, he didn't leave once. He slept in the chair. He ate vending machine sandwiches. When the nurses told him visiting hours were over, he refused to go, and eventually they just stopped trying. My sister came by, and my aunt, and a few friends from church and from the bakery. But it was Daniel who stayed. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive to have a man who loved me like that. And I was about to find out exactly how much that love had cost him, because not everyone in that hospital room was happy to see me wake up. The first sign that something was wrong came on the second day I was awake. A fire investigator stopped by my room. Routine, he said, just following up on the incident. He asked me a few questions about the furnace, the water heater, when it had last been serviced. I told him Kyle had worked on it just a few weeks before. The investigator wrote that down and got very quiet. He thanked me and left. I didn't think much of it, but I noticed how my sister reacted when she heard Kyle's name come up. She'd been sitting in the corner, and when I mentioned the water heater, she went still, just for a second. Then she got up and said she needed coffee and left the room. A few days later, after I was discharged and recovering at home, the detective came. His name was Detective Ramos, and he had that folder I told you about. He sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd been sitting the night I nearly died, and he laid it all out. The carbon monoxide hadn't come from a faulty furnace. It hadn't come from the water heater wearing out on its own either. Someone had deliberately tampered with the exhaust venting on the water heater in the basement. They disconnected and partially blocked the flue pipe that was supposed to carry the carbon monoxide safely outside the house. Instead, every time that water heater ran, it had been slowly pumping poison up through the floor vents and into my home. This was done by someone who knew what they were doing, Detective Ramos said. And it was done recently. This wasn't wear and tear, Mrs. Bennett. This was deliberate. I remember the room going very quiet. I remember the metallic taste coming back into my mouth. The memory of all those headaches, all those dizzy mornings. Weeks. It had been happening for weeks. Someone tried to kill me, I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. We believe so, yes. And that's when my family did exactly what the family in every story like this does. They turned on the person who had saved me. It was my aunt who said it first, sitting right there in my living room. It was Danielle. Just like that. Like she'd been waiting to say it. Think about it, Claire. He's the one who's home with you. He's the one who'd inherit everything. Your father left you that bakery and all that money, and Danielle knows it. I said no. I said it before she even finished. But my aunt kept going, and then my cousin chimed in, and even Megan, my own sister, looked at me with these sad, knowing eyes and said, Claire, honey, I didn't want to believe it either. But who else had access? Who else benefits? I felt like I was losing my mind. Daniel was in Charlotte, I said. He's the reason I'm alive. The detector he installed is the only reason I'm not dead in that house right now. Or, my aunt said, that's exactly what he wants you to think. Maybe he set the whole thing up so he'd look like the hero. Maybe he never expected the fire department to get there in time. I looked over at Daniel. He was standing by the window, and he had gone completely pale, completely silent. The accusation just hung in the air around him. And I watched this man who hadn't slept in a week, who had driven 90 miles an hour through the dark to save me. I watched him absorb the suggestion that he'd try to murder his own wife. He didn't yell. He just looked at me and said very quietly, Claire, you know me. And I did. I knew him. But Detective Ramos was watching all of this, and the law doesn't run on what you feel in your heart. Daniel had motive on paper. He had access. He was the obvious suspect. They brought him in for questioning that same week. They searched his truck. They pulled his phone records. They went through our finances with a fine-tooth comb. For 9 days, my husband was the prime suspect in my attempted murder. 9 days. And the whole time, my family kept circling, kept whispering, kept telling me I was a fool for defending him. My aunt actually said to me, blood is thicker than water, Claire. We're your family. We're the ones looking out for you, not him. That phrase stuck with me. We're your family. We're the ones looking out for you. Because here's what I couldn't stop thinking about, lying awake those long nights. If Daniel didn't do it, then someone else did. Someone with access to my house. Someone who'd been in my basement, with my water heater, with the exact knowledge of how to make poison flow up through my floors. And there was only one other person who fit that description. I didn't say anything. Not yet, but I started paying attention. I started remembering things. The way Kyle had spent so much time in that basement, far more than the water heater job should have taken. The way Megan had been asking me strange questions in the months before about Dad's will, about how much he'd left me, about whether Daniel and I had life insurance, whether the bakery was worth more sold or kept. At the time, I thought she was just curious, or maybe a little envious, the way siblings get. Now, those questions felt like something else entirely. And then there was the night, about 2 weeks after I got home, that changed everything. I couldn't sleep. Daniel was finally back in our bed, cleared but exhausted and hurt in a way I knew would take a long time to heal. I got up around 2 in the morning to get a glass of water, and I noticed my phone screen lit up on the nightstand. Megan had called Daniel's phone, not mine, his, and left a voicemail, then hung up and called again, 3 times, at 2 in the morning. It struck me as odd. Why was my sister calling my husband in the middle of the night? I didn't confront anyone. Instead, the next day, I called my dad's old lawyer, the one who'd handled the estate. I asked him a simple question. If something happened to me, who inherited what? What he told me made my stomach drop. My father, it turned out, hadn't split things evenly between Megan and me. He'd left the bulk of the estate, the bakery, the building, the savings to me, with a smaller cash gift to Megan. He'd done it, the lawyer explained gently, because he was worried about Megan's situation, her relationships, her stability. He didn't want the family business sold off or drained. He told the lawyer, in confidence, that he trusted me to take care of my sister, but couldn't trust the men in her life with that kind of money. And here was the part that made everything click into place. There was a clause in the will. If I died without children of my own, my entire estate would pass to my next of kin, to Megan. I sat in my car in the lawyer's parking lot for almost an hour, just shaking. Daniel didn't stand to inherit a thing if I died without a will of our own naming him, and we'd never gotten around to making one. We were young, we thought we had time. If I died, everything I had went to my sister, and from my sister, of course, to whoever stood beside her, to Kyle. I drove home in a daze, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to accuse anyone yet. I had no proof, just a horrible feeling and a will that gave my sister every reason to want me gone. So I did something I'm not proud of, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I invited Megan over for dinner. Just the two of us, I told her. Sister time. Daniel agreed to stay upstairs, and before she came, I set my phone on the kitchen counter behind the fruit bowl and I pressed record. She came over around 6. We made pasta, drank wine, talked about old times, and slowly, carefully, I steered the conversation toward the investigation. I told her the detective thought it was Daniel. I watched her face, and then I told her something that wasn't true. I told that the police had found a partial fingerprint on the flue pipe in the basement and that they were running it against everyone who'd had access to the house. I watched the color drain out of my sister's face the same way it had drained out of mine in that detective's chair. That's good, she said, but her voice had gone thin. That'll prove it was Daniel. It might, I said, unless it's somebody else's print. Kyle did a lot of work down there. And that's when she made the mistake that ended it. She got defensive. Kyle would never, she said. He was just doing his job. He was helping you, Claire. Do you understand that? He spent weeks down there for you people, and you barely paid him She stopped herself. But it was too late. For me, I said quietly. You said for you people, Megan. What did Kyle do down there? She started crying. And then it all came pouring out the way it does when someone has been holding something too heavy for too long. It wasn't even that she meant for me to die, she sobbed. Kyle had this plan. The water heater thing was supposed to look like an accident, an old house, faulty equipment, a tragedy nobody could blame on anyone. She said she'd never thought it would actually work, that she told herself it was just talk, that Kyle had drowned them both in debt and the only way out he could see was the money I'd inherit when I was gone. He said it would be quick, she whispered. He said you wouldn't suffer. I will never forget sitting at that table looking at my baby sister, the girl I'd held at our father's funeral, and hearing her describe how she'd helped plan my death and told herself it was just talk. I would have given you the money, I said. My voice broke completely. Megan, if you needed it, all you had to do was ask. I would have given you everything. You're my sister. She couldn't even look at me. I picked up my phone from behind the fruit bowl and stopped the recording. And then I called Detective Ramos. The rest happened fast. They arrested Kyle the next morning at the apartment he shared with my sister. The fingerprint story had been a bluff, but they didn't need it anymore. They had Megan's recorded confession, and once Kyle was in custody, the physical evidence came together quickly. His tools matched the marks on the flue pipe. His prints were down there after all. Phone records showed the two of them had been researching carbon monoxide and searching things no innocent person searches. Kyle was charged with attempted murder in the first degree. Because the act was premeditated, planned out over weeks, and committed for financial gain, the prosecutor pursued the most serious charges available. At trial, the jury took less than a day to convict him. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Megan took a plea deal. She testified against Kyle, and in exchange, the prosecutor reduced her charge. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy and was sentenced to 12 years, eligible for parole after 8. I sat in that courtroom for every single day of it. I watched my sister, in an orange jumpsuit, refuse to meet my eyes. People ask me if I've forgiven her. I don't have a clean answer for that. Some days I think about the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and I want to. Other days I remember the smell of poison in my own home and the floor tilting sideways and the carpet against my cheek. And I can't. My therapist says forgiveness isn't a single decision. It's a thing you do over and over. And maybe one day it'll take. I'm still waiting. As for Daniel, the man my family was so quick to convict, the man who saved my life with one paranoid little detector and a 90-mile drive through the dark, we're still together. We made that will. Finally. We cleaned out the basement and replaced everything down there. And last bling, we found out I'm pregnant, a girl. We're going to name her after my father. The hardest lesson I learned through all of this isn't that strangers can hurt you. Everyone knows that. The hardest lesson is that sometimes the danger isn't at the door. Sometimes it's the person you handed the key to, sitting across from you at Sunday dinner, laughing along with everyone else. The people who told me they were looking out for me were the ones who tried to put me in the ground. And the man they all wanted me to blame is the one rocking our daughter to sleep tonight. I almost lost my life to the people I trusted most. But I didn't. I'm still here. And every breath of clean air in my house is a thing I'll never take for granted again. The thing that haunts me most isn't the poison or the floor tilting sideways under me. It's how long I refused to see what was right in front of my eyes. For weeks my body was screaming at me. The headaches, the dizziness, that metal taste in my mouth, and I kept telling myself it was stress. I think part of me didn't want to know, because knowing meant facing that someone close had decided my life was worth less than money. Every choice in this story carried a price. Kyle chose greed, and that greed put him in a cell for 30 years. Megan chose silence, told herself it was just talk, and that silence cost her 8 years and a sister who can't yet look at her the same way. Nothing that happened was random, it was all planted, slowly by hands I trusted. But Daniel chose something different, and that choice saved my life. He didn't have proof of anything. He just had a feeling that something was wrong in our house, and instead of letting it go the way everyone told him to, he acted on it. He bought that little detector when people called him paranoid. He drove 90 miles in the dark on nothing but instinct. That's the kind of quiet decency I want to be surrounded by for the rest of my life. The kind that does the inconvenient, unglamorous right thing when no one's watching and no one's clapping. If I learned anything, it's that loving people doesn't mean switching off your good sense. I gave Kyle a key without asking myself a single hard question, because asking felt unkind. But real care includes paying attention, noticing when the questions a person asks you stop adding up, trusting the pattern your gut is forming, even when your heart begs you to ignore it. I wish I thought harder sooner. I wish I'd connected the strange questions about Dad's will to the man spending too long in my basement. Clear thinking isn't cold. Sometimes it's the most protective thing you can offer the people you love and yourself. And then there's the part where I had to keep going. There were mornings after the hospital when I couldn't get off the couch, when the betrayal felt heavier than the carbon monoxide ever did. Setting up that dinner, pressing a chord, hearing my own sister confess across a plate of pasta, it took something out of me. I'm still rebuilding. But I did it. I stood in that courtroom every single day. I made the will, replaced the basement, chose to bring a daughter into a house I almost died in. Surviving wasn't the hard part. Choosing to live fully afterward was, so pay attention to the people you hand your keys to. Do the inconvenient right thing even when they laugh at you. And when life tries to break you, get up anyway. That's the whole lesson. Written in poison and saved by a man who simply refused to stop worrying.